Good morning. Hemsheh Chaim Beis. We're on page 1170, volume 2. The pages are all posted on ayinbeis.com if you want to follow along and you don't have the sefer, the book. Just look there, ayinbeis.com, all the PDF, all the pages scanned in PDF are there. Okay. 2 levels of ayin are now the Pnimius and Chetzenius HaKav. So the Kav is this energy flow of divine energy that followed post Tzimtzum, yet its negei v'davuk means it touches and is connected to the pre-Tzimtzum consciousness. So he called that dveikus, but not dveikus mamish. It's not a ha'ara nivdelis. It's not like a separate reflection. It's a reflection of a reflection, meaning a reflection of the light before the Tzimtzum. Chazer v'her, it returned to radiate. So you have a connection to pre-Tzimtzum, but in a channeled way. So he called that a dveikus, but not dveikus mamish. Gili mina etzem, not gili ha'etzem. And yet it's still considered darga gavoya, he called it. So madrega gavoya, because it's ultimately gili Ein Sof. It's a revelation of divine energy, however, through the kav. And compared it to like the Cyrus that go from Atik to Chachma. So it's true, it goes through Cyrus like thin strands, like thin wires, but it's connected. It's not disconnected. That's Chetzenius HaKav. The kav in its functional state, as it creates existence, as it has within it, as he said earlier, a kav, a line that's made up of nekudas, of points. These points are the subtle and the beginnings of the spheres, which will ultimately become full-blown and full-dimensional in Atzilus Eiris B'Kelim. Pnimius HaKav, there he says, is Nimshach Mepnimius Atzmius Ein Sof. That the Pnimius HaKav, like the inner dimension of the kav, as we discussed, like the inner kavana and tension, there you have the Pnimius Atzmius of Ein Sof. And he gave in the parentheses, he explained, Yesh Lemer, this is a chiddush from the Rebbe Rashab, that's the Gili HaEtzem within Pnimi. Not Gili Mina Etzem, but Gili HaEtzem within Pnimi.
Somebody has
that
the
essentially is the intention, he says, which is higher, its root is higher than the root of Makif even of the Bligvul, the infinite light that is transcendent, the root, not the actualization. Obviously, Makif is higher in Giluyim, but in the source of the intention, the words he used here is that Makif is only a reflection. And here, it's not mepchinas ha'atzmus. It's only haspashtus. The gili etzem der pnimi b'madregas ha'atzmus. And the gili etzem of der pnimi is madregas ha'atzmus because, as I explained, because that carries the ultimate purpose of creating existence. So though, it's like saying that the yesh has a deeper root than the oir. The oir is still higher in giluyim because it's revelation, it's bittul, it's divine awareness and divine consciousness. The yesh doesn't have that. But the root of the yesh is higher. So similarly, it's not exactly the same because we're talking about here. The pnimi, in other words, the power of the teacher to dig deeper, to be able to tailor the energy toward a student in the root needs more intensity and more strength than the teacher just free-flowing his ideas in an infinite way without any limits. And then he said, Bechinas primis, that was the parentheses. Then we continued. He said, "The Pnimius HaKav lo yesh chalkus." The Pnimius HaKav, we don't have distinction or the diversity. Kol makom hu b'shava. It's an equalizer. Everywhere it is carrying that inner dimension of the kav, it equalizes, and it doesn't have islapshus v'salmus, as opposed to Chetzenius HaKav, which manifests and enclosed in levels and gets concealed as it travels down Shtalshlus, Seder Shtalshlus, the previous Akav is not subject to that. It remains like we spoke about, like the inner kavana that the artist has as he's painting, that's maintaining the integrity of the connection back to the source. And then finally, where we stopped was the last parentheses. He says, "V'gam kamei." I want to just read that again, a little more detail. I'm reading from the line that begins, "Hu b'shava" on page Aleph Kufay 1170. The parentheses, "Degam kamei mislabish." That also the way it is mislabish. If the Pnimius Akav in any way has some mislabshus, he says sheslabshus ube elikus. It's an elikus, meaning it's not in something relating to what elikus is creating, the yesh and the ayin of the yesh hanivra, but this too is elikus. So even when the Pnimius Akav has some form of islapshus, it doesn't spell out what that means exactly, but you'd say the Pnimius Akav and Chassidus Akav, they're both the kav. So at the end of the day, even the Pnimius Akav has some connection to the kav. It is the inner dimension. So let's put it this way: when it's speaking to the Chassidus Akav and keeping it aligned to the kavana, he says it's a slapshus in elikus itself. It's not a slapshus a chachma bina, or in the definitions of yehi and yehi rakia. It's more in elikus itself. It's a form of slapshus. That's what it sounds like he's saying. So looking in that mokamacher, which I have to look up, maybe we'll find more information on that. But then he says, "But amitis madregazu." But the true level of this level of the Pnimius Akav, the inner dimension of the kav, ain't above b'chinas slapshus kalal. So clearly, in Pnimius Akav itself, it looks like there's an element of islapshus, which is elikus, but the true nature of it, its true personality, and its truest sense, it is beyond islapshus. I'll explain what that means in a moment. And he gives the example like Pnimius Seidus HaTeira, Hanika Rosen de Rosen. The inner dimension of the secrets of the Torah, secrets of the secrets. Now, what does islapshus mean exactly? Let's define what islapshus is. In Chassidus, it talks about maiver and islapshus, that there's two ways that an energy at any level, any transmission transmits. One is b'derech maiver. Maiver means it's just passing through. So to say it's completely unaffected, no. But it's like what's called a mashpech, a funnel. When you pour liquid through a funnel, it's only passing through the funnel. The funnel may be shaping it somewhat, but nothing changes. The wine you pour through a funnel is wine on the other end as well. Hislapshus, on the other hand, is, I'll give a mashal for it in a moment, is when one entity gets dressed up in another entity, which means it assumes the personality of the malbish, the malubish, assumes the malubish assumes the personality of the lavush. The example of Chassidus, the classic example for the difference is seichel in your mind and seichel that travels through your fingers when you write an idea. So we know it's in the mind, seichel is a keli, the moyach, the physical brain, is a container. It's a lavush that the moyach, the seichel completely is mislabish in it. The seichel isn't passing through the brain. That's where it resides. It's dwelling, it's its domain. And they have a relationship, just like an oir and a keli. Like the eye, the power of vision in the eye is hislapshus. Hislapshus oir b'keli. However, what about when you're writing an idea, it's flowing from your mind, are your fingers a lavush and a keli to the seichel, or it's a maiver? So Chassidus says it's maiver. Why? Because the seichel doesn't reside in your fingers. Your fingers are just an instrument through which the seichel is traveling in order to get onto paper. So to say it's not going through the fingers, it is, but it's only like passing through. So lavush always impacts that which dresses up in that garment. Especially, we spoke earlier about a lavush atzmi, like machshas, a lavush atzmi that's attached to the connection, not like a jacket. You know, you put on a garment, a physical garment, you could put on a garment that's not at all even commensurate to where you are. We have the stories of kings dressing up in the garments of peasants, of lay people. Actually, that conceals who they are. But there are garments that actually have a relationship with that one is dressing. When a melech wears big day levush malchus, then it's expressing his kingship. It expresses his crown, his big day melech. Or you say the begadim of the kehanim, the kavod of the Tiferes. This was a very specific levush that they had to wear. It was fitting to what a kohen should wear. Ma'ivir, on the other hand, passes through. Now, I don't really want to talk about ma'ivir. I'm just using it to explain. So now when you say hislapshus, the chetzenius akav for sure is hislapshus, because that's his purpose. That's why it's a kav. It's meant to shape chachma, bina, das, and so on. So it has clearly definition, and it relates to the thing that it's energizing. Like when we say koyach hapoil benifel, that the power of the producer in the product. It's not from a distance, it's hislapshus. It's not passing through. When Abishah said Yehi Ur, Yehi Rakia, the words actually vivify Ur and Rakia, and they're distinct. And the Ur is fitting perfectly to the thing that it's creating. Just like the vision in the eye, and just like the seichel in the mind, in the brain. Okay. Pnimis Akav, on the other hand, he says it's not hislapshus, because it's not the stylus, it's not the paintbrush, as it's actually defining, let's say, creating a small little lake, or a bird, or a bush, or a human being. There, you have to be engaged. The artist has to draw the brush close to the canvas and paint the colors and all the specifics. The Pnimis Akav, as we've been discussing, is more the inner kavana of the kav, which is connected more to the vision of the artist and his purpose in it, and maintaining that integrity. So the Pnimis Akav is not bislapshus. It's not applying itself to the colors or the shapes or the definitions. It's something that's beyond hislapshus. Any hislapshus it does have, he says, is elikus. But it's a mitis. What he says, it's a mitis madregazu, ain't above b'chinas hislapshus klal. Because it's not subject to hislapshus. That's not its role. Its role is to remain in its own pure form. It's the primis of the kav, correct. It's pnimi, not makif, and not bligvul, and not the lifnei tzimtzum. But its main role here is not the specifics of that come through the hislapshus of the artist's hand on the brush as he's painting, with a small qualification. The brush is an outside force. The kav is an inside force. It's a lakus. So the paintbrush is really just a foreign element. But imagine the artist's his fingers extend and they become an extension and they paint the picture without a foreign instrument. That's the only difference between the mashal and the nimshal. Not the only difference, but the main difference. So now he compares this to Pnimis HaTorah. What is the point here? So I was thinking about it. Is he saying, because it's called Pnimius, and since we're talking about Pnimi here, that's the Pnimius of the Pnimius, meaning Seidus Rozin Dir Rozin, because he says, Pnimius Seidus HaTorah, the inner dimension of the secrets. He doesn't say Seidus HaTorah alone. In other words, when we're learning, when you learn the difference between Nigla and Pnimius HaTorah is in a way the difference between, you could say a little hislapshus and maiver. Nigla the Torah is hislapshus. Every sugya in Gemara and halacha addresses real issues on earth. An argument between Reuven and Shimon, partners. What do you do when you have a mitzvah? Hilchah Shabbos, Isser v'Heter. That's why the Alter Rebbe, quoting Raya Mehemna, in Simach Chavov in Ageres HaKedesh, he says that the Zohar says, Raya Mehemna, that Nigla the Torah is called Eitz Hadas. Ilana the Tevara. Yes, how could you call a Torah Das Tevara? So he says it's not Tevara. It's involved in Tevara. It's mislabish in arguments. What's a true argument? Who's saying the truth? How do you prove evidence? It's mislabish in the matters of this world. Pnimis HaTorah is called Ilona Dechaya. It's called the tree of life. There's no Tevara there. It doesn't talk about Ra. I mean, it talks about Ra in the context in its root. The Rebbe explains that that's not, however, it's not involving, in Chassidus, you're not going to start getting into, is Reuven right or Shimon right? It doesn't involve itself in the corrupt world in which we live and try to create a birur halacha. Nigla is about creating birur. What does the Torah say? How do you find truth in a false world? Chassidus is about how to reveal truth in a false world. It doesn't involve itself in the falsities. It's mamshech eir. You're learning about elikus, about atzilus, and about bria, even the mitzvahs. Even Isser v'Heter is about how it is in its root, in Atzilus. The difference between Amitzeda and so on. All is Amshachas L'mayla. So therefore, Chassidus is not the slapshus of Torah. It's more removed because it's about Gili Elikus. So in Pnimis HaTeira itself, this is what it sounds like he's saying. That I'm not sure if he's saying Chitzenis HaKav is like Nigla the Teira, or maybe it's like Seidus HaTeira, and Pnimius HaKav is the Pnimius of Seidus HaTeira, Rozin the Rozin. So in Pnimius HaTeira itself, you have two dimensions. You do learn about Atzilus Bri, Yetzir Asiyah, so there is distinctions of levels. It's not involving issues of a hostile and corrupt world directly, but it's still involved. And then there's Pnimius of Pnimius HaTeira, and there the focus is on the Elokus Shebezeh. It's about the divine Gili that's coming through Chassidus, or through Pnimius HaTeira. That's what it sounds like he's saying, that when you're talking with this level, it's higher than the Islapshus, because it's not only higher than the Islapshus of Nigla, it's even higher than the Islapshus of Pnimius, which is already defined. Like, for example, when you learn Rozeh Daraisa, you learn about all the levels. Ak, Tiferes, Tzimtzum, after the Tzimtzum, Kav. And then there's a Pnimius within that itself, which is the Gili Elikus, the revealed divine that comes and expressed through what Pnimius HaTeira does. It's less tangible, more abstract, and therefore not subject to the slapshus of a regular concept. So when we're learning these ideas, there's one part you're learning the ideas, and there's another is you're getting a feeling for the divine, for Elikus, a hergish Eliki, a resonating experience of Elikus, much more than the specific details. That's how I would explain what he's saying. But you know what? This is my explanation. He doesn't explain it at all. He just says it's like Rozeh de Rozin. If there's other explanations that work, perfectly fine. But I just wanted to elaborate a bit because we didn't do that yesterday. And that's where we stopped. So if anybody has questions, fine. If not, I'll begin by V'ha'inyan hu. Okay. So now with the next section here, he's going to explain what the difference between Chitzenis HaKav and Pnimius HaKav in their location, so to speak, how they play themselves out in their root, where they come from, where they originate from. And it's a very interesting piece here that many people have not learned. I just was looking at I want to just look at the Rebbe's Maimer a minute. B'yem Hashmini Atzeres. We'll learn it after we finish this subject of Pnimius Chitzenis HaKav, because the Rebbe does talk about it. Yeah. Okay. Va'inyan hu. The line begins, Slapshus Klal, it's around on 15 lines from the top. Actually, 11 lines from the top. Okay. Va'inyan hu, the inyan in this, the difference between Chitzenis HaKav and Pnimius HaKav. The outer dimension of the kav, of the line or thread of energy, and the Pnimius HaKav. What is the difference? He says like this. Va'inyan hu, the inyan of this is the hine yedua, because now it's known. The sheidish hamshachas HaKav, where does the kav originate from? So what we've learned till now is the kav originates from the before the tzimtzum. So let's spell it out again. The before the tzimtzum is a state of total divine awareness and consciousness. There's no room for anything else. This is the words of the Arizal. So God does what? He makes a tzimtzum, conceals that leaves a cholol l'mokim panei, an empty hole, an empty vacuum, and empty space, a vacuum and empty space. There is a reshimu, a trace of what was there before, but it's concealed completely. And then a kav, and achar kach, it says, chozer v'hoyer. He now returned and begins to draw a thread of light from the Ein Sof lifnei Tzimtzum, which is like concealed, drawing out the kav, and the kav will now begin to shape and create existence. Chav is chozer u'misagel, the kav will create an igul, and another igul, and then igulim v'yesher, makif, and pnimi. So the kav is now the operative force of creation. So that's what we've learned. Now this kav is attached to its source, even though it came after a pause, so to speak, after a leap. So it's dveikus, but not dveikus mamash. But where exactly, what level does the Kav originate? So in Kabbalah, there's two different statements made, and they seem to contradict each other. And he's going to reconcile it between the Chetzenius and Primius HaKav. So where does the Kav originate from? In Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, we've learned there are many levels. Not actual levels, but relatively speaking, there is levels that are before Rotzen even. Oyer Etzem, Etzem Oyer, Gilia Etzem. There's Ispashta Seir. There's Koidem Alesa Rotzen, before even a desire emerges. Then a desire which begins with a Rotzen Kloli, a Heskim. If you remember, a consideration, then a Shakavetaria deliberation, a determination, Achlota. Then comes Rotzen HaKloli, comes Rotzen HaPrati, and Rotzen HaKodum. Then Shir Atzmei B'Koyach, that he's estimating, that he's envisioning existence and allocating resources. The 10 hidden spheres. So there's 10 hidden spheres. Which level does the Kav come from? So he's going to say that there are two different statements made. One is that it comes from Malchus of Ein Sof, which means Malchus of the 10 hidden spheres. And another place it says Tiferes of Ein Sof, Tiferes of the 10 hidden spheres. Now again, there are no spheres there. It's only God envisioning, the artist envisioning, before the Tzimtzum. So where does the Kav originate from? That's what he's going to discuss now. So he says, it's Yedua that the root of the Hamshachas HaKav, the root of where the Kav transmits from, Hu mebchinas Malchus de Ein Sof. Malchus de Ein Sof, which again is Hashem HaMushal. We only use it because we have no other words to say. It's like the lowest level of the Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. Ukameshikosav HaMikdash Melech, like the Midrash Melech writes, Al Maimar HaZoyer Breishis Daf Tezvov Amar Aleph, on the Zoyar, Tezvov, the famous Zoyar 15a, right in the beginning of Zoyar. We all know the expression, Bereish Shur Benisa de Malka. In the beginning of the Ratzon or the Reshus of the king. Goliv Galifu b'Tehirei Law. He engraved in Tehirei Law in the Eir Lifnei Tzimtzum. He envisioned existence. And there he goes on to speak about the levels in that. And that's where we identify the level of Shir Atzmei B'Koyach. That's what the Migdash Melech says. The Shir B'Atzmei Kavyochel HaEses Sfiris. Shir literally means he estimated, or Shir means he measured, he envisioned. It's like when someone's Meshayir, when someone, before something happens, you in your mind, you envision or you imagine what it's going to be like, the reality that comes afterwards. So in other words, existence didn't begin with existence. It began with a divine energy, envisioning existence. So that Chassidus, that in Kabbalah, Chassidus elaborates on this, is called Shir Atzmei B'Keach. We learned a lot about this in the early chapters of Ayin Beis. That's where I began the first time the mashal of the artist, among the infinite possibilities, Shir Atzmei B'Keach. He envisions a particular one type of art, and Shir Atzmei B'Keach, in this potential, he either allocates or envisions Shir Atzmei B'Keach. In the potential state, he envisions that which is going to come afterwards. So Shir Atzmei B'Keach Kavyochel, Shir B'Atzmei Kavyochel, Ha'eses spheres, the 10 spheres, Ukeshashir B'chinas HaMalchus, and when he envisioned the level of Malchus, Shir Mokum L'Amidas Elemis. He also envisioned a space for where the worlds would emerge from. So in other words, the divine consciousness before the Tzimtzum envisioned all the 10 spheres, and when he envisioned the lowest one, Malchus, he also, that relates to the space where the world will come to, existence will begin to come after the Tzimtzum, obviously. So all this is pre-Tzimtzum. Okay. And this is where the Tzimtzum took place. Not in higher than Malchus. In the level of Malchus, where he's Shir, where the creator, the artist, is envisioning creation, and the lowest level of it, That's where the Tzimtzum takes place. Shenasa cholol u'mokem pani. That creates that. From that becomes a cholol, a vacuum or an empty alcohol, u'mokem pani, an empty space. Va'oyer, and the energy that was there, pre-Tzimtzum, nistalik lamaila, that in a sense like reverted or returned back. When you say, for example, like we see the waves come onto a beach and then they revert back, they turn back into their source. So nistalik lamaila, the energy, the divine energy that was there, pre-Tzimtzum, so to speak, conceptually, reverts back or returns back into its source, in a state of makif. Till now, it was the only thing that was present. But once the Tzimtzum takes over, what happens to this Eir HaBligvul, this Eir, what he calls the Eir Nistalik, what happens to it? It turns in a state of makif. It remains like hovering and transcending the whole structure of the Chol Mokem Panei. That is the picture painted by the Migdash Melech in explaining the Zohar. Okay. Now comes V'achar kach. He's continuing to say, Himshich Ein Sof kav echad. And then after this, so we have pre-Tzimtzum, envisioning the 10 spheres, envisioning Malchus, which includes envisioning the space for existence, the Tzimtzum, which creates the space, and that energy becomes makif, and that happens next. You still need to create. So now, Himshich, and afterwards, again, conceptually, next stage, he drew down, Ein Sof, drew down, kav echad, one line. Not one line, meaning not expansive, bligvul in all directions. It's one kav, dak, a thin line, mina eira eagle shaloi. From the eagle that remained surrounding, as we said, hovering and transcending. What he called before makif, now he's calling eagle. So the kav comes from the eagle. It's not coming from nowhere. It's attached at the top to the eagle, to that circle of light, which reflects the transcendent energy which has receded into its source, so to speak, to leave space for existence. In the space, a kav now enters that's drawing energy from the eagle, but it's a kav echad. Mina eagle, eira eagle shaloi, u'kamesha kosu be'etz chaim. As he writes in Eitz Chaim about this, in Eitz Chaim he spells it out. What it doesn't say in Eitz Chaim is where the kav originates, the Malchus of Ein Sof. What he wants to touch upon here, what he wants to emphasize here, that does not say in Eitz Chaim. Eitz Chaim just talks about the Eir, the Tzimtzum, and the Kav. Here, the Migdash Melech, based on the Zohar, adds more specifics, exactly the Malchus of Ein Sof, among the 10 spheres themselves, and the Kav. You can say, to make it a little more palatable, I would say the following. Let's go back to the mashal of the artist. So the artist, after determining from the infinite possibilities, and obviously even the state that he's even higher than being an artist. So this artist is now a state of artist, but Tiferes Ein Ketz, infinite spheres. Within that, he chooses 10. And that's the Shir Atzmei B'Koyach. He's now allocated and envisioned one particular type of art called the 10 spheres. But that's still not the creation of art. You still need to have a tzimtzum. But here's a key thing that may be helpful here. In his envisioning itself, there are also stages. There is the Chochma Bina Das Chesed Gvura Tiferes Netzach Chod Yesod of his envisioning. He's envisioning all of it. But it's the Malchus of his envisioning that's going to most relate to actually creating the art, because it's the lowest level that funnels. In other words, the artist is investing in his art, wisdom, feelings, moichin, midas. It's all in an envisioned state. It's all in the sheer atzmei state. But he's bringing his whole personality into it. Malchus, as we know, is the final funnel that channels all the 9 faculties into ultimately creating. Like it is with Malchus of Atzilus, it takes Chabad, Chagas Nehi, and creates, like the woman, And the husband and wife, the husband provides the seed. The woman is the place where creation takes place. The child is conceived, and then you have a new creation. So the same thing is on the subtle level, and the highest levels. Malchus of Ein Sof is the place that essentially channels the envisioning now, not creating yet. The envisioning of the artist's vision of the 10 spheres. Malchus of Ein Sof is the one that relates most to the bringing it into action, which comes next is the Tzimtzum, and it also envisions the space for the existence. So it's not just, if you ask the artist on the level of Chachma Bin Das, he's still removed from an actual canvas and creating art. It's just the beginnings of the envisioning of the art. Malchus relates more to it. That's where the Tzimtzum will take place, the concealment of all that divine artistic energy. And now you have space to send a kav, the paintbrush, so to speak, that's attached. And it's coming from where? From Malchus of Ein Sof, because that was the lowest place before the Tzimtzum. That becomes the source of the eagle. The lowest part becomes the place where the kav is drawing energy into the space, which is actually beginning to create the art.
So the HaNelem
putting it in more
is the Tzimtzum?
Tangible terms, so to speak. Even though obviously you need to always qualify, this isn't tangible at all, it's all abstract. But it's a conceptual idea. You have there the picture of how this is taking place, the earliest stages of how creation begins.
So the HaNelem is the Tzimtzum?
Okay.
Is the HaNelem the Tzimtzum?
Okay, so then it goes like we stopped. This means from the light that was removed. It really means concealed. The energy that was there before the Tzimtzum that is now concealed in the form of makif and nigel, from there, kav. From there comes the kav. And this is shezeu b'chinas malchus the Ein Sof. That level from where the kav comes is malchus the Ein Sof, it's called. So when you say malchus, that's Atzilus, it's Atzilus. Here it's malchus of Ein Sof. Which, by the way, is Atzilus the Klolos, in case you're interested. It's Atzilus in macrocosm. So the kav draws from there with the hefsek of the Tzimtzum, as we discussed. Okay.
Could you hear me?
That's one explanation of where the kav is rooted. Ulapamim isa, and at times it says, meaning in other places, ulapamim, at times it says the sheidish hakav, the root of the kav is from a different level. Hu mibchinas Tiferes HaNelem, from the hidden Tiferes, meaning the Tiferes in the 10 hidden spheres. Till now, we're just saying that the kav is coming from the lowest of the envisioning of the 10 spheres. Now he's saying in some places, Lapamim, at times, it says that the root of the kav is in Tiferes, not Tiferes HaNelem. As soon as you say HaNelem, you mean talking about Tiferes before the Tzimtzum and the 10 hidden spheres.
Can you hear us?
Commotion is barley ill, as was explained earlier. Dibra maskal tzavis b'nei Yisrael es karbonai lachmi. So this le'il, if you look on the bottom, is quite a long time ago. It's in volume 1, page 554. So we're talking about over, now we're 1170, 554. Good 600 pages ago. In volume 1. So what was discussed there? Be'inyin keil havaya lekim, daber vayikra. So the pasuk says 3 names: Keil, Havaya Elikim, daber vayikra, and he called out. So Chassidus explains, or the Maimer there explains, what is this Keil Havaya Elikim? So he says these 3 names refer to Keil is Chesed, Chagas, HaNelomim. They refer to the 3 chagas in the 10 hidden spheres. Keil is Chesed, Elikim is Gvura, and Havaya is Tiferes. V'Havaya, hu b'chinas hakav, shu Tiferes HaNelem. And he explained there that the Havaya is the level of the kav, and where is it rooted? In Tiferes HaNelem. Or maybe I should rephrase a bit. Keil is rooted in Chesed HaNelem, Elikim is rooted in Gvura HaNelem, and an Havaya is rooted in Tiferes HaNelem. And that's the Kav. So there you see clearly that the Kav is rooted in Tiferes, not in Malchus of Ein Sof. In Tiferes, it's a much higher level. Like it says in the gloss, in the gloss of the Ramaz, Ramoshe Zakuto. He was one of the great Kabbalists, a student of the Arizal, but he's quoted very often in Chassidus. But Eitzes Chaim. So Eitzes Chaim is yet another sefer written by Rab Chaim Vital. Remember that Arizal did not write his teachings. Rab Chaim Vital was his loyal and faithful scribe. So all the writings of the Arizal, except like L'Chodeidi and a few other things that the Arizal composed himself, were written up by Rab Chaim Vital. That's why you find the Sfarim are all named with the name Chaim. Eitz Chaim, Pri Eitz Chaim, and now Eitzrus Chaim. Eitzrus Chaim is yet another sefer that Rab Chaim Vital wrote, teachings of the Arizal, and there's some additions that the Eitz Chaim doesn't have. So he says that's what it says in the Ramaz. On the Eitzrus Chaim says Shakav hu mebchina shelo higia by hatzimtzum.
The Lechodoidi is not from the Arizal.
It's a critical statement here, that the Kav comes from a place that shelo higia by the Tzimtzum did not touch, that the Tzimtzum did not reach.
The Rabbi doesn't hear.
Seemingly what we just learned.
He doesn't hear us.
We just learned that the Kav comes.
No, he doesn't hear
from
us.
A place higia by
somebody tell him that.
Malchus the Ein Sof, that leaves at Meshayir, he says, a space for existence. In that there's the Tzimtzum, and from there comes the Kav. Now he's saying the root of the Kav precedes Malchus of Ein Sof. It goes back to the envisioning of the divine before the Tzimtzum in Tiferes. And here clearly the Ramah says Shalehigia, Mokim Shalehigia by a Tzimtzum, a place that is beyond the Tzimtzum. The Kav is affected by the Tzimtzum. The Ramaz agrees with that, or else it wouldn't be a narrow flow. But its root is in a place that's higher than the Tzimtzum. So now you have a different interpretation, a different opinion. By the way, you guys all hear me? Everything is clear?
No, we don't hear you.
Hello?
We hear you. You don't hear us.
Just comment.
You don't hear us.
Nobody hears me?
He's saying you don't hear us.
Can you guys hear me?
We hear you. You don't hear us.
Yes.
I don't hear you because I was on mute. Okay, I muted you. I muted you all because I'm able to concentrate better. Okay, fine.
Could you hear us now?
I hear you, but let me finish before you interrupt. I was wondering why everybody's so quiet. It's nice. Quiet.
You had so many questions, but you didn't respond.
Okay, keep it up. It's good to hear you without in a non-broken way.
Silence is golden. Let me finish. Maybe this is a good exercise. You could hold your questions. If you can't remember them, write them down, and I'll address them. I'm not running anywhere. Let me just finish this point here. Okay. So now what's added is that the Kav is rooted in Tiferes HaNelem. That's stated, like you said, from the Maimer Tzav. Kale, Havaya Lakim. So the Havaya is the Tiferes HaNelem from where the Kav is rooted. The Kav is Havaya, which is rooted in Tiferes HaNelem, I should say. And now the Ramaz is added, that's from a place of the Gia by a Tzimtzum. So the Kav is affected by the Tzimtzum because it's following the Tzimtzum. That everybody agrees. But if you look, where's the root of the Kav? Which level of energy, divine energy before the Tzimtzum? Going back to the artist, which level in the artist's envisioning of the art does the Kav originate? From the Malchus, the lowest level, or from higher, deeper levels? Remember, we said earlier that the Pnimius HaKav is reaching in places that are even higher than the Er Makif in the root. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going to reconcile it by answering exactly that. So Vahainu, Lamailama Er Shanichel Bahamoyer. It's higher than the energy that the Tzimtzum impacted to revert back and go back into its source. Remember, we spoke about that the air filled everything. The Tzimtzum caused the air to nistalik, to revert back, to draw back, and be concealed in a state of makif. That's where the Tzimtzum had an impact. That's higiya by a Tzimtzum. But now we're saying that the kav is rooted in a place that the Tzimtzum didn't have impact. That means the kav is drawing energy that the Tzimtzum did not cause for it to draw back. It's reaching a place that is pre the oir that's affected even by the Tzimtzum. That's meaning a very high level. Higher than the oir that was affected by the Tzimtzum to be removed from this empty space, concealed from this empty space, the cholol. Now the kav, shezehu b'chinas Malchus the Ein Sof. That's the level of Malchus the Ein Sof. Malchus the Ein Sof is with the oir that the Tzimtzum did affect. According to the Ramaz, hakav shoshim et Tiferes. Tiferes is higher than Malchus. Malchus is the level of oir that was impacted by the Tzimtzum. Like the first way we explained where the kav is rooted from. According to this Lepomim that it says the kav is rooted in Tiferes HaNelem, according to the way that Ramaz says, it's rooted in a place where the Tzimtzum never had impact. It's going back and drawing energy from places that are even higher than the Tzimtzum. Then higher than the oir impacted by the other dimension. They have two different roots. The primis hakav b'chinas primis v'atzmus Ein Sof. Primis hakav, which carries the inner kavana and the inner point of the whole kav, that comes from primis v'atzmus Ein Sof v'zeu shesharshem Tiferes. And that's what it means when we say it's rooted in Tiferes, because it's rooted in the levels in high levels in Ein Sof lifnei Tzimtzum. V'yadua the Tiferes elad hakeser. We know that Tiferes after the Tzimtzum is the kav emtzoi. Remember, in the structure of the spheres, there's no structure. But later, when there'll be a structure, it'll be like this. There's chachma, bina, das. Chachma is on the right, bina is on the left, das is in the center. Keser is in the center on top. Chesed is on the right, gvur is on the left, Tiferes is in the center. Netzach on the right, Hoid on the left, Yesod in the center, and Malchus is in the center. So the Tiferes, Oila Ada Keser. Tiferes bypasses, it goes through Das, but when you don't count Das, Tiferes, it has a direct line like the Kav Emtsoi Hamavriach Min HaKotza LaKotza. It's a Kav Emtsoi, it's like the spine that goes from Tiferes straight to Keser. L'mayla mahabeis kavim, higher than the two kavim of Chesed and Gvura. So though Tiferes technically comes after Chesed and Gvura, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, but it has its own track and line straight to the core. So the same thing is lifnei Tzimtzum, conceptually, in the envisioning state, the Shiur Atzmei, that Tiferes HaNelem is taking it straight to the Keser. So the kav, he's saying, the primis kav is rooted there. Which means from the inner dimension of Keser. Now, of course, we're talking here Keser now, figurative Keser, in the 10 hidden spheres. You don't usually talk about that, but that's what he's saying here. But we learn about Keser before the Tzimtzum from Keser after the Tzimtzum. It has a similar pattern, except there it's completely in Elokus Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, and the Tiferes in Atzilus is already a structured existence. But you can learn from it. Shahari Beis Kavim Gamken Shoshin Bekeser. Chesed and Gvura, right and left, are also rooted in Keser. V'Tiferes Shemagil L'Maylam Beis Kavim, and Tiferes that reaches higher than the two tracks of Chesed and Gvura, Hainu B'Primis HaKeser. That means in the inner dimension of Keser, which we usually refer to as Atik. I'm going to read till the end here, then I'll take the questions. Ulachein, in the parentheses, Tiferes Keil Beis HaKavim. Because Tiferes has that element that reaches higher in the source, that's why it encompasses and essentially reconciles and harmonizes between Chesed and Gvura. As we know, Tiferes is Shalom. Tiferes is the Kav HaShlishi. Like we say, Kosav HaShlishi Machriya Beineim. You have two verses, Seisim says, that contradict each other. The Kav HaShlishi, Kav HaMachriya. So Tiferes, how does it have the power to bring together Chesed and Gvura? Because it's rooted in a place that's higher than both of them. Umeshum Zeh Kav HaMtzoi. And that's why the middle rod, the middle line, the middle path, Shava b'chlolos hamshachosei, mereshis hamshachosei at seif siyumei. That's why the Tiferes, like the spine, it equalizes in its general transmission. Why general? Because obviously Tiferes also has a specific role among the spheres, but it has an element in it that the expression is mavriach min hakotzad lakotzad, which is the briach hatichen, when they build the Mishkan. So the walls were connected with brichim. They were connected with these, what are they called? Rods. And there were rods that connected one wall to the next, but then there was one rod that went all the walls. It was like a centrifugal type of rod, like a spine. You have bones that go in different directions in the skeleton, but you have one spine that goes from the top to the bottom. It's like the main artery, so to speak. So Tiferes is like that main artery, and it equalizes from the Reishis HaMshachosei. Like we said before, the Primis HaKav is an equalizer. It doesn't create distinction. It's an equalizer. Like we said earlier in the top of the page, what Primis HaKav is like. Kenoida, as it's known. The Chen Gam, and the same as that we can apply that we know about Tiferes in Atzilus, Chen Gam, Tiferes HaNelem, same thing, the hidden Tiferes in the 10 hidden spheres, Magia Mibchinas Pnimis V'atzmus Ein Sof. It reaches the inner and core levels of Atzmus Ein Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum. V'nimtzad the B'chinas Pnimis HaKav. So what do we derive from this? That the inner dimension of the Kav, Hu Shenimshach Mibchinas Pnimis V'atzmus Ein Sof, that draws from the Pnimis Atzmus Ein Sof much higher than Chetzenis HaKav, obviously. Which is that? B'chinas Yesh HaMiti. So it's the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti. Aval Chetzenis HaKav. But the outer dimension of the Kav, Hu Shenimshach Mibchinas Malchus the Ein Sof, that is rooted in Malchus of Ein Sof, where the Tzimtzum had an impact. The Gam K'moshu Kedem at Tzimtzum, even the way it's before the Tzimtzum, meaning how the Kav is rooted in the level of Malchus Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, Hu B'chinas Ha'ara Levad. It's only a reflection. V'akav Hu B'chinas Ha'ara de Ha'ara. Malchus the Ein Sof is a Ha'ara, and the Kav is a reflection of a reflection. Now, obviously, you have to qualify. Tiferes HaNelem and even Pnimius Atzmus Ein Sof is still Oyer. But he doesn't want to call that the Ha'ara. Here he's talking about Ha'ara in a more diminished state. That's a Oyer Atzmi. It calls it Pnimius Atzmus Ein Sof Chinis Yesh HaMiti. It's as close as possible that you get to the Yesh HaMiti. So here you have that the Pnimius HaKav is like Ayin of Yesh HaMiti, and the Chetzenis HaKav relates to the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra in these highest levels, pre and post Tzimtzum, as we just discussed. Okay. I'm happy to take any questions.
The oil shall Malchus Ein Sof is the eagle. He said Himshich Rasaf Kavachot Dakan or eagle Shaloi.
So the eagle is a Oyer Makif. Okay.
Is this Malchus Ein Sof, yeah?
1 second, I'm answering. The eagle is an Oyer Makif of Oyer. That Oyer has within it the 10 hidden spheres. The lowest level of the 10 hidden spheres is the lowest level of the eagle. It's like Malchus of the Makif, of the Oyer Makif. So it's the Malchus of the eagle that he's talking about. So the eagle, yes, the Malchus of the eagle would be the way I would put it. Or you could say the eagle itself is Malchus of Ein Sof. It's not clear 100%. Either way works.
You could also say that the whole entire Spheres is the eagle.
You could, but then you have a problem because Tiferes is a Mokim Shalei Higir by Tzimtzum. So you have to say that there are parts of the eagle that are higher than being affected by the Tzimtzum. The eagle here sounds like it became an eagle because of the Tzimtzum. Because it was the Oyer Mamala, and then it reverted, it retreated, so to speak. And that means it's affected by the Tzimtzum. Tiferes HaNelem, we said, is not affected by the Tzimtzum. So you don't have to say that in the eagle there's a level that's affected by the Tzimtzum and affected not. You could also say that the eagle is affected by the Tzimtzum, the Oyer L'maylamai eagle. There's Oyer L'maylamai eagle HaGadol that's not affected. I have to look at the end of Adam Ki Yakriv, Samach Vav. He talks about this in a little more detail. I want to look it up there. I think he brings two opinions about what the eagle is. what exactly is the Igul HaGodel. But right here, the Igul HaGodel is associated with Malchus of Ein Sof.
Here also, he's saying, המשיך סף קו מן האור העיגול שלוי, משם האור שנסתלק נמשך אחר כך הקו שהוא מבחינת מלכות אין סוף, ולפעמים ניסה לשורש הקו מבחינת תפארס HaNelem. So he's also bringing two opinions.
There's the whole thing here is there's two different approaches. Pnimis HaKav and Chetzen. Which one are you talking about? You can't bring that in one line.
That's what he said, that הקו שלו מבחינת מלכות אין סוף, this is the חיצוני הקו.
Yeah, then starts a new thing. Ulapamim, Isa, that's Pnimis HaKav. Yeah, okay. Any other questions?
The last four words, V'akav hu b'chinas ha'ara da'ara kulu. That's talking about chitzonius hakav, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what he said, that the kav b'chinas shelo yigei be'atzimtzum, haynu l'maylo me'or shenichol b'moyer, shelo b'chinas malchus de Ein Sof. Is ha'oyer
shenichol is the oyer shenichol b'moyer, not l'maylo.
No, the kav is l'maylo me'or shenichol b'moyer, shelo b'chinas malchus de Ein Sof.
Nichol b'moyer is the Malchus of Ein Sof. You listen to me.
Yeah.
Nichol b'moyer is affected by the Tzimtzum. That's Malchus of Ein Sof. The kav is higher than that.
Right, he said, Tiferes HaNelem. So, ha'oyer shenichol b'moyer, what is he talking? He's not talking about the...
I just elaborated for a half hour.
But he's not talking about the Ein Sof shelifnei Tzimtzum.
Hold on. 1 second. You asked a question. Let me answer. I just explained at length. The oyer that was mamala kol ha'metzias was affected by the tzimtzum, noga by a tzimtzum, higia by a tzimtzum, and caused that oyer to retreat and revert back. Oyer nichlo ba'amoyer, meaning that it should be like removed, concealed from the chol l'mokamponi. That's Malchus of Ein Sof. The kav is rooted in a level that's higher than that.
Okay, but he's not talking about the Ein Sof shelifnei tzimtzum much before that. When he said,
yes, he is. You're talking about the Pnimis HaKav or the Chitzonius HaKav? Malchus of Ein Sof or Tiferes HaNelem?
No, in Chitzonius HaKav, he said that this is the oil shenichol b'hamoyer. It's not talking about the oil like the Ein Sof shelifnei tzimtzum.
Yes, he is. Er shelifnei tzimtzum shenichol b'hamoyer. Why? Of course he is. What other oil is there here?
Because we learned in Tzadik Dalet before about the oil which is reflecting of Atzmus. He's not talking about this.
We're talking now about the tzimtzum that affected the oyer. The oyer got concealed, was removed from the chol l'mokamponi. That means oyer nichlo ba'amoyer. Why? You're bringing other things that are not what he's talking about here.
Okay, good.
The oyer that's impacted by the tzimtzum,
okay,
that's called Malchus of Ein Sof, is the oyer nichlo ba'amoyer. This is not Tzadik Dalet. This is a specific level of Malchus of Ein Sof.
Good, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Someone had a question before about the Makim Panoi, I think.
What's the question?
I'm just trying to remember what it was. It was in the middle when you were in the middle saying the whole thing. Makim Panoi is the symptom, right?
I'm going to stop here now at the end of this paragraph on page 1070.